As individuals, we belong to groups as small as a dyad to as large as the human race. And yet we live in a world that needs changing at every single level, from interpersonal racism and institutional sexism to the fact that our country is facing a decision about who will lead our country and the type of ideologies that we think should be the leaders. Collectively, we're still trying to determine whether our impact on the planet and whether our clashes between cultures will lead to our extinction. Now, as a social psychologist, I'm interested in explaining behavior so that I can change the world. And so this has led me to ask questions like, how do you control your behavior? And even though you've never been in the situation you're in right now, you still act nearly perfectly at every given moment. And what kind of system can do this? Does it follow rules? And if so, what are those rules? Now, traditional cognitive science has tended to equate your brain to a computer. You have a hard drive that's like your memory, and your processing speed is sort of like the CPU. But this has created problems in that, how did those programs get there? A computer needs a programmer, and so how is it that all these individual programs got there, and where did they come from, and why are we the only biological creatures with this perfect model of the world and how to act in it? Now, for me, I want to explain this in a different way. I'm interested in explaining human behavior from the perspective of physics, from this perspective, the mathematical and theoretical perspective of self-organization and emergence and how these systems evolve over time. And by self-organization, I mean the lack of a central controller or a central executive. And by emergence, I simply mean that the behavior can't be understood in terms of its parts in isolation. We have to look at the interactions between the parts rather than reducing the brain to its smallest components and trying to add them up to get behavior. And I'm not the only one to do this. Self-organization has been used as a theoretical perspective for understanding lasers and social animals like insects and dolphins and swarms of birds. And also we've understood human behavior in this way, from the way that you talk to each other to how you tend to move sort of in synchrony at the same time when interacting with someone else. Here's an example. Look at all of these metronomes. You can think of these as sort of like individuals. Each has its own particular rhythm, yet just like humans, they're sort of structurally similar. And when we allow them to affect each other, just as our interactions tend to affect the interactions we have with other people, so here, this is the board, the movement that of one affects the other, and we can no longer understand these in terms of an isolated components. They tend to come into this synchrony and this pattern of coordination. And here it's the local interactions between individuals that gives rise to this global pattern, the whole board swinging back and forth, that once it's emerged, you can no longer understand each one of these in isolation. You have to understand them from the perspective of the whole system. I think this is a great example for human behavior. And I don't think it's actually an analogy at all. I think it's a direct explanation of human behavior. That for us, it's the local interactions between individuals that gives rise to this slow timescale dynamic, and what we call that slow timescale dynamic is culture. And once culture has emerged, it becomes the most important determinant of the system, the most important determinant of your behavior. Now, from this perspective, from a self-organization perspective, this means that your behavior isn't controlled by you. It's not your brain functioning that allows you to act in any given situation. It's the fact that you are connected with others and have been always. Now, this is sort of me taking the you out of your behavior. And so at this point, you might feel a little bit frustrated or might not buy that explanation. But what's interesting is that you might even ask, well, how do these laws of physics help me to understand these giant problems facing humanity? Well, the beauty in this synchrony is that we have a mathematical formulation of how this works. And in these types of systems, there are really only two ways to destabilize these slow timescale dynamics. One is to pull the board out from underneath all the metronomes. We could say that culture doesn't matter or your individual history doesn't matter, and this doesn't really make a lot of sense for human behavior. We can't say, oh, live in isolation and your culture is insignificant to your actions in the future. But the other is to amplify the fluctuations that exist in the system already. Now, for humans, what that means is that your little pushes and interactions with everybody else are what gives rise to changes in these slow timescale dynamics that we call culture. So even though I've said that culture controls your behavior, this math also allows us to understand that your interactions and your little consistent pushes are what move the systematic status quo to a different stable state. So it's your agency that allows you to change what controls your agency. Take this example. We recently legalized same-sex marriage in the United States. And this wasn't the result of all the individual brains changing their functional connectivity to have a less biased view of marriage. Rather, this is the persistent and insistent activity of the LGBTQA+ community and their allies in many small situations over time. So here it's these moment-to-moment battles that sort of fluctuate and shift the stability of the system away from subjugation and towards an altogether different view of marriage. And we could make similar arguments for desegregation or voting rights or any other large societal shift in attitudes or behaviors. Now, I find that empowering. For me, what this means is that even though mathematically I don't matter, in the real world I do. And it's my small pushes and my instances where I fight back against the system that are what allow the system to change. So what this means is that your small individual pushes make a difference that's much greater than the sum of your parts. I think this is important because we live in a world that needs changing. And it needs changing at many, many different levels. For me, that means that I identify my own white privilege in every situation that I'm in. And when I see instances of discrimination, I have to speak up. And if there's someone who needs an ally, it's important for me to be an ally to that person. The mathematical formulation of this simply gives my agency meaning. And this means that, yes, you are a citizen of many circles, sort of in line with the theme we've discussed here today. But you're also in all the circles at once. And really, to be you is to be in connection with others. So this means that you should surround yourself with people who have similar small pushes, whose fluctuations ripple through those circles as if they were laying flat across a pond. And most importantly, this means that you need to surround yourself with people who disagree. Because those local fluctuations and disagreement are what move the system into a whole new stable state. And what I find most beautiful about this explanation is its simplicity. That the same laws that guide the beauty that we see in the natural world also give us power to change the world. And they govern our behavior in a way that, although mathematically we may or may not matter, but in the real world, our small pushes are what allow us to change the world. Thank you.